well they're doing. So there are lots of different assessment methods. Just take a minute to have a look at the few that I've listed here. Some of them you may never use. Professional discussion, for example, you might never use that. But some of them you might use quite a lot. Some of them you may have experience but not seen as assessment, such as observations or group projects. And they've all got their own advantages and disadvantages, and the advantages and disadvantages of these methods really will depend on the particular circumstances that you're in, what you're trying to teach, and who you're trying to teach it to. So which method best suits your content? Do you want to assess how well students can remember things? In that instance, maybe a closed exam is good, but if you want to know how students use knowledge but you don't necessarily care that they can't remember it, an open exam might be more useful. You might want to test a student's writing skills, so essays and dissertations are a good method there, but you also might want to test how well they can speak, so oral presentations might be better there, or even professional discussion. So which method will give you the best information? That's really the question you should be asking when choosing a method for you, your students, and external bodies. So there'll be different stakeholders in each kind of assessment. So it might just be about you and the students if it's an informal mid-module assessment. But if we're looking at summative assessment, particularly at the end of a degree course, there's going to be external bodies, and the university itself will have a stake in how assessment is carried out. So they might want reliable results. So they'll want maybe something like an essay or a dissertation, or something that can be marked reliably, and quite possibly something that can be marked on an individual basis rather than a group basis. So peer assessment might not be the best one for a kind of final degree mark. But have a think. Explore different methods, even if you don't necessarily want to explore using different methods in your teaching, and perhaps you don't have the power to change assessment methods. It can be useful just to think about, okay, what would happen if I picked simulations? How would I use simulations to assess in my particular subject? What would be the advantages and disadvantages? Would it work? So just a sort of counterfactual exploration, if you will. Even if you can't actually design and implement an assessment, it can be really useful to just kind of think through the process and explore how these different assessment methods would mesh with the concrete details of the teaching that you actually do. Feedback. Good feedback is something that most of you will probably have the power to do. And it can make a real difference to how students feel their module has gone. And good feedback can be the difference between good and bad evaluations. And it can go a long way as well to making up for bad results. So even if a student does badly on an assessment, if you give them the right feedback, that mitigates the effect a bit. They might still be disappointed in how well they've done, but they're much more likely to use it productively rather than use it to resent you or resent the subject. So Nicol and Macfarlane-Dick have come up with 7 principles of good feedback practice, which I think pretty much sum up what good feedback looks like. So firstly, good feedback helps clarify what good performance is. So it might be goals, criteria, or expected standards. So this goes back to what I was saying about assessment being objective. It's no good just kind of saying, oh, that wasn't very good. I didn't like what you did there, because you don't get a sense of what was actually expected. All you know is that what you did wasn't very good. So if you can say, well, what you did wasn't very good, but here's what would have been good, that helps a student kind of think about where they want to get to. It's not just about doing better, it's about doing something specifically different. Related to that, good feedback facilitates the development of self-assessment or reflection in learning. So reading good feedback will make a student want to think about how they've done. And this is a difficult skill, because if a student's done badly in assessment, what they'd really like to do, as I'm sure most of us would like to do, is just forget about it. So you have to go against their completely natural human instinct. But if you can, it's really worthwhile. And a good way to do this is just to keep referring back to what students did in the essay. So when you did X, this meant that you did not fulfill criteria A, or you are really good in class but not so good in this particular assessment, so there's a skill differential here. Just kind of making sure you tailor the feedback to the student and that it always relates to concrete things that they can think about what they actually do. Thirdly, good feedback delivers high quality information to students about their learning. So it should be detailed, it should be relevant, it should show that you've really connected with what a student's been writing. And I know that's incredibly difficult to do when you've got loads and loads to mark and you've got loads of other things to do. And I know that marking is one of the massive time sucks of academia. And sometimes you won't be able to give high quality information if you're marking 100 papers in a week. There will be a limit, but as far as you can, just even thinking about the quality of information that this is giving to students. Am I assessing students a lot and giving them a lot of low quality information? Would it be better to assess them maybe less and give them high quality information? And again, even if you don't have a choice about the assessment methods and you don't really have a choice about the quality of information you give students, you can think about the quality of information and kind of say, well, actually, does this give reliable information to students? Is this something they can use? Fourthly, good feedback encourages teacher and peer dialogue around learning. That's really important. One way to do that is to make sure that even if you deliver feedback in a written format, you follow that up with a face-to-face meeting so that the has a way to respond about their learning, so they can say, oh, I didn't think I had done as badly as I have. Here's what I thought about it. This really surprised me. Not so much so that the student can argue with you about your grade, because that's something that you shouldn't have to deal with, but more that so that you can talk to the student, get a sense of maybe why they did, what their next steps are, and just get a conversation going. And ideally students will share with their peers as well, but this is something that is particularly difficult, especially when students want to save face and they haven't done very well. But if you can see it happening, that's a really good sign. Good feedback, really importantly, should encourage positive motivational beliefs and self-esteem. Even if the feedback is on how badly the student has done in an assignment. It can be really difficult, I know, but try to find something positive, even if it's only like you write very clearly, and the reason may be because they don't put enough detail in, or your diagrams are neat. You know, obviously not completely contrived, but that can be, even the smallest bit of hope can make a student want to kind of put in place the corrections and the criticisms that you give. It can be the proverbial spoonful of sugar, let's say. Obviously, I'm not encouraging dishonesty or flattery, but it should make a student believe that they can make the improvements, rather than just making them feel hopeless or resentful. It should also, related to that, provide opportunities to close the gap between current and desired performance. So not just you're at A but you should be at B, but okay, you're at A right now, here's how you get to B, giving specific concrete things. And that could mean that the desired performance is not, say, a first. If a student's getting a third, you're not going to get them to a first from a third in one piece of feedback, but you might get them from a third to a lower second. So just making sure that gap is reasonable and giving them concrete things to try out in order to close that gap. And then once they've closed that gap, they'll be a little bit further along, so maybe another gap will open and the desired performance can move up. But just thinking about the fact that there is a gap and how students will be able to cross it can be really useful. And finally, good feedback should provide information to teachers as well. Especially if the person giving the feedback is not doing the teaching. So it can be used to help shape the teaching in the future, particularly on mid-module evaluations. And equally, your own feedback can provide you with information. If you are applying all these principles of good feedback, you should be able to read through them and then actually say, okay, everyone is misunderstanding this particular aspect of my course. How can I make things better? How can I shape my teaching to improve that? So those are 7 principles of good feedback. Have a think and have a look at your feedback and see what you currently do and whether they actually fulfill those principles. Thanks for listening. Enjoy the resources on Q+, and I'll see you in your seminar or Blackboard Collaborate session.